In the New Mexico desert, there's a trail of footprints that shouldn't exist. They were pressed into soft mud on the edge of an ancient lake, then buried under thousands of years of sediment. When scientists finally dated them, the number didn't make sense. These footprints are more than 21,000 years old. That's roughly 8,000 years before humans were supposed to have set foot in North America at all. For most of the 20th century, the story of how humans reached the Americas seemed settled. But over the last 30 years, that story has been quietly falling apart, discovery by discovery. And the real answer turns out to be stranger and far more impressive than anyone expected. Look at a map, and the puzzle becomes obvious. North and South America are surrounded by ocean on almost every side. There's no walking route from Europe, no walking route from Africa. For humans to reach this hemisphere at all, they needed either an extraordinary land connection or the ability to cross open water. Long before anyone thought that kind of travel was possible. So where did the first Americans actually come from? And when did they arrive? Answering that meant piecing together footprints, spear points, ancient bones, and DNA, scattered across 2 continents and tens of thousands of years. The traditional story starts around 13,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age. Sea levels were so much lower back then that a strip of land connected Siberia to Alaska. Scientists call it Beringia. As the planet slowly warmed, 2 massive ice sheets covering Canada pulled apart, opening what researchers named the ice-free corridor. Small groups of hunters, the theory went, followed migrating mammoths and bison straight through that gap, and kept walking south into the heart of North America. Those hunters left behind a very specific weapon, a thin stone blade with a groove cut into its base, made for lashing onto a wooden shaft. Archaeologists found the first ones near the town of Clovis, New Mexico, in 1929. For decades, the Clovis people were treated as the founding population of the entire Western Hemisphere. First people. First tools. Case closed. Except the case wasn't closed. It just hadn't been tested yet. The first real crack appeared in the rainforests of southern Chile, at a site called Monte Verde. Starting in the late 1970s, archaeologist Tom Dillihay uncovered wooden tent stakes, preserved plant remains, even a chunk of chewed mastodon meat. He dated the site to roughly 14,500 years ago, over 1,000 years before Clovis, and more than 8,000 miles from the Bering Strait. If that date held up, people had already reached the southern tip of South America before the ice-free corridor even existed. Geologists later calculated that the corridor wasn't actually walkable, with enough plants and animals to survive the trip, until around 13,800 years ago. Which raised an uncomfortable question. If the corridor wasn't open yet, how did anyone get past the ice sheets at all? The answer researchers eventually settled on didn't involve walking through the ice. It involved going around it. By water. Scientists began proposing what's now called the Kelp Highway hypothesis. As the Ice Age eased its grip, a narrow strip of Pacific coastline, rich with kelp forests, shellfish, and seals, opened up along the shore, stretching from Japan all the way down toward Baja California, a coastline that productive could support small groups traveling by simple boats, moving from one resource-rich cove to the next, without ever needing the continent's interior to thaw out first. Genetics backs up this story in an unexpected way. When researchers compared the DNA of indigenous peoples across the Americas to populations in Siberia, they found something odd. Native American genomes carry mutations that don't show up in any known Asian population. Mutations that take thousands of years to accumulate. The leading explanation is called the Beringian Standstill. Somewhere between roughly 25,000 and 15,000 years ago, the population that would become the ancestors of Native Americans got stuck. Maybe trapped by advancing glaciers, maybe simply settled where they were. Either way, they lived in isolation for thousands of years, growing genetically distinct from their Siberian relatives before pushing further into the Americas. That still left a gap. If people stayed isolated in the north until 15 or 16,000 years ago, how do you explain footprints in New Mexico, thousands of miles south, dated to 21,000 years ago? That's the exact contradiction the White Sands footprints created when they were first announced in 2021. Researchers used radiocarbon dating on seeds trapped in the same soil layer as the prints and got a range of 21,000 to 23,000 years. Other scientists pushed back hard. They argued the seeds came from an aquatic plant that absorbs old carbon from lake water, which can make radiocarbon dates look artificially ancient. So the team went back. Between 2022 and 2023, they gathered a completely different kind of evidence: pollen from land plants and the surrounding lakebed mud itself, tested independently at two separate laboratories. Both labs landed on nearly the same window as the original estimate. 3 different materials, 3 different dating methods, all converging on one answer. People were walking through what's now New Mexico during the coldest, harshest peak of the last ice age. Not after it, during it. And the story is still moving. In the last few months alone, 2 new studies have shaken different corners of this timeline. 1. Published in the journal Science in early 2026. Ray examined the geology beneath Monte Verde and argued the site might actually be thousands of years younger than originally claimed, somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 years old, instead of 14,500. The archaeologists who excavated the original site strongly disagree, and the debate is far from settled. Around the same time, a separate research team proposed that the long genetic isolation behind the Beringian Standstill might not have happened in Beringia at all, but farther west, along the coastline near Japan. Neither claim has been fully accepted, but together, they're a reminder that this isn't a closed chapter of history. It's an active argument, happening in real time, as new evidence keeps forcing scientists to redraw the picture. Even with the argument still going, one thing is becoming impossible to deny. Humans did not simply walk into 2 empty continents through one tidy corridor, right before Clovis hunters showed up with their spear points. They arrived earlier, by more than one route, likely by both land and sea, adapting to Arctic tundra, dense rainforest, high mountains, and open desert, without metal tools, without horses, and without a single written record to guide them. By the time Christopher Columbus reached the Caribbean in 1492, the people he encountered weren't strangers to a new world. Their ancestors had already been there for thousands of generations. They had already crossed oceans he hadn't dared to sail, and built complex societies across 2 entire continents. The oldest confirmed footprints in the Americas were already more than 15,000 years old before the first stone of the Great Pyramid was ever set in place. Columbus didn't discover a new world. He arrived, extremely late, to one that had already been fully explored,